Hello there. Welcome to a journey through time to a world very different from our own, yet filled with stories that still echo today. Let's travel back to England in the middle of the 15th century, a land of rolling green hills, bustling market towns and ancient castles. The year is 1455, a time when the fate of the nation hung in the balance. England was a country deeply troubled, its people anxious and uncertain about the future. Dark clouds, both literal and metaphorical, gathered over towns and villages, as everyone sensed that change was coming. For over a century, England had been locked in a bitter conflict with France, a struggle we now call the 100 Years' War. But by 1455, the war had ended in disaster for the English. Soldiers returned home, weary and defeated, their banners tattered, their spirits low. Almost all English lands in France were lost, a devastating blow to national pride and a catastrophe for the noble families who had built their fortunes on those territories. Castles that once buzzed with activity now stood empty, and noblemen gathered in their halls, mourning their lost wealth and influence. Back home, King Henry VI sat on the throne. He was a gentle, deeply religious man, more comfortable with prayer and contemplation than with the harsh realities of ruling a kingdom. His lack of interest in politics created a dangerous power vacuum at the heart of government. Into this void stepped the powerful lords of England. With private armies at their command, these ambitious men began to act like kings in their own right. They fought private wars, settled old scores, and often ignored the king's laws entirely, plunging the country into chaos. Law and order began to break down. Justice was no longer blind, but could be bought and sold to the highest bidder. Corruption spread through the land as officials took bribes and turned a blind eye to wrongdoing. The economy, already weakened by years of war, struggled to recover. Many returning soldiers, unable to find honest work, turned to crime, preying on their fellow countrymen and adding to the sense of lawlessness. At the royal court, things were no better. The king was surrounded by greedy favourites, most notably the Duke of Somerset, whose influence and ambition made him many enemies. The court was seen as corrupt and self-serving, out of touch with the suffering of ordinary people. A sense of crisis was building, and at its heart were two powerful families: the Lancasters, who supported King Henry, and the Yorks, led by a man who believed he had a stronger claim to the throne and could rule more effectively. The York family, led by Richard, Duke of York, challenged the king's authority, claiming that only he could restore order and justice to the realm. Tensions between these two houses grew with each passing day as both gathered supporters and prepared for conflict. The rivalry between Lancaster and York was about to erupt into open warfare. In the streets of a small market town, ordinary people watched nervously as armed men gathered, knowing that their lives would soon be changed forever. That town was St. Albans. Here, in 1455, the first battle of what would become known as the Wars of the Roses was fought. The streets ran red with blood as the two sides clashed, marking the beginning of a brutal and bloody civil war. The stage was set for a conflict that would tear England apart for decades, pitting neighbour against neighbour and forever changing the course of English history. The storm was about to break, and no one could predict how or when it would end. To truly grasp the depth of this story, it's essential to become acquainted with the key figures who shaped its course. On one side, we have the House of Lancaster, a noble family whose emblem is the striking red rose, a symbol of their passion and determination. At the helm of the Lancasters is King Henry VI. Though a man of kindness and gentle nature, he struggled with the demands of leadership, often seen as lacking the fortitude required to govern a kingdom in turmoil. His wife, Queen Margaret of Anjou, was a formidable woman, fiercely protective of their young son, Prince Edward. Her determination to secure her son's future was unwavering. Standing by her side was Edmund Beaufort, the Duke of Somerset. Despite being a loyal ally, he was often blamed for the military failures in France, casting a shadow over his reputation. Opposing them is the House of York, represented by the elegant white rose, a symbol of purity and rightful claim. Richard, Duke of York, was a man of great power and ambition. His claim to the throne was strong, and he was determined to assert his rights. Frustrated by the rampant corruption and feeling marginalized by Somerset's influence, Richard believed he was unjustly kept from the power he deserved. Richard of York was not alone in his quest. He had the support of the influential Neville family, especially Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, whose strategic mind was invaluable. Warwick, later known as the Kingmaker, was a charismatic and influential figure whose ability to sway opinions and gather support was unmatched. Together, York, Salisbury and Warwick formed a formidable alliance, a trio whose combined strength posed a significant threat to their adversaries. They were convinced that Somerset and the Queen's party were leading England down a path of ruin, and they were determined to stop them. This clash of personalities, ambitions and ideologies was a volatile mix, setting the stage for inevitable conflict. The stage was meticulously set for a confrontation that would not only alter the course of their lives, but also change the future of England forever. The battle lines were drawn, and the fate of a nation hung in the balance as both sides prepared for the storm that was about to unfold. The crisis reached its peak in the year 1453, marked by two pivotal and dramatic events that would alter the course of English history. The final English stronghold in France fell, signalling the end of the protracted and devastating Hundred Years' War, a conflict that had drained resources and morale. King Henry VI, already known for his fragile mental state, fell into a deep catatonic condition, leaving England without a functioning ruler at a critical time. In response, Parliament took decisive action by appointing Richard, Duke of York, as Lord Protector of the realm, entrusting him with the governance of the kingdom. York swiftly moved against his political adversaries, arresting the Duke of Somerset, a key rival, and imprisoning him in the infamous Tower of London. However, on Christmas Day 1454, a miraculous event occurred. King Henry unexpectedly recovered, regaining his senses and his throne. With the king's return to power, York's position as Lord Protector was abruptly terminated, and Somerset was restored to his former influence and authority. York, along with his allies, the powerful Neville family, found themselves in a precarious situation, their influence waning and their safety in jeopardy. They were unceremoniously dismissed from the King's Council, their presence no longer welcome, and they feared imminent arrest and retribution. Feeling cornered and threatened, York retreated to his strongholds, contemplating his next move in the face of growing hostility. Determined to protect his interests, he began rallying his loyal soldiers, claiming his actions were against corrupt councillors, not the king himself. The tension escalated, and a confrontation between the factions became inevitable as both sides prepared for conflict. The stage was meticulously set for a dramatic showdown. The air was thick with anticipation, and the tension was palpable. Like a gathering storm, the conflict loomed on the horizon, ready to unleash its fury upon the land. The battle lines were drawn with precision. The conflict was unavoidable, the clash was imminent, and the die was cast. The fate of the realm hung in the balance. In May 1455, the political chess game turned military. Queen Margaret and Somerset called for a great council in Leicester, a Lancastrian stronghold. York and his allies suspected a trap and responded with force. They gathered their armies, about 3,000 strong, and marched south. Their intentions were peaceful, they claimed, but they demanded Somerset's removal. The King's party, with around 2,000 men, stopped in St. Albans. On May 22, 1455, the two armies faced each other. The town was a natural defensive position for the King's forces. King Henry sent heralds to negotiate, but York demanded Somerset's surrender. The King refused, and the time for talking was over. The stage was set for battle. The First Battle of St. Albans was a brutal street fight. The Lancastrians blocked the main streets with barricades. For 2 hours, the battle was a stalemate. York's men charged repeatedly but were held back. The Lancastrians had a strong defensive position. The Yorkists were exposed in the open streets. The king waited near the marketplace, hoping for peace. The Yorkists had a secret weapon, the Earl of Warwick. Warwick led a flanking maneuver through back gardens. His men burst into the town, surprising the Lancastrians. The defenders were attacked from both front and rear. Panic spread, and the Lancastrian line collapsed. The battle turned in favor of the House of York. With Warwick's men in the town square, chaos erupted. The Lancastrian force was overwhelmed. The Yorkists hunted specific targets, capturing the king unharmed. The Duke of Somerset, York's primary target, was cornered and killed. His death was the symbolic climax of the battle. Other key Lancastrian leaders were also slain. The Yorkists systematically eliminated their rivals. King Henry took shelter in a local house, terrified. An arrow grazed his neck, a shocking indignity for a king. York and Warwick approached him with respect, declaring loyalty. They escorted the bewildered king to safety. The king was now their prisoner. York had won a total victory. He defeated the king's army, killed his enemies, and captured the king. The balance of power in England shifted dramatically. The stage was set for a new era. After the battle, York was in control. The Lancastrian leadership was wiped out. Queen Margaret fled with her son. York escorted the captive king back to London. He placed the crown on King Henry's head, showing who was in charge. Parliament pardoned York and his allies, blaming Somerset for the battle. York was made Lord Protector again, ruling in the king's name. But the sons of slain noblemen sought revenge. The cycle of vengeance would fuel conflict for years. The First Battle of St. Albans marked the true beginning of the Wars of the Roses. It was the first pitched battle, turning political disagreement into open warfare. Blood was spilt, crossing a line with no return. The battle set a precedent. Political disputes could be settled with violence. It created a motive for future conflict, revenge. The battle failed to solve who should rule England. The Wars of the Roses had begun, sparked by St. Albans. The First Battle of St. Albans cast a long shadow over England. It set the pattern for decades of civil war. The country swung between Lancastrian and Yorkist rule. The legacy was instability and violence. The monarchy's authority weakened, and law was often decided by force. The conflict led to the end of both the House of Lancaster and the House of York. Henry Tudor's victory united the warring houses. The battle marked the breakdown of England's political system. It was a stark lesson in the consequences of failed politics.